From the archives of the Midnight Society, we present an account of obsession, music, and an audience that never leaves. This story was pieced together from a series of frantic emails and a single unposted blog entry found on the laptop of a local musician named Julian Vance shortly after his apartment was found abandoned. It all began, as so many tragedies do, with a simple purchase at an estate sale. A beautiful old instrument that seemed to promise artistic greatness. But Mr. Vance soon learned that the fiddle's price was not paid in dollars, but in souls. He didn't just buy an instrument, he inherited its audience. I've been a musician my whole life, but struggling was a generous term for my career. I played cafes for coffee money, my own compositions ignored in favor of whatever was on the radio. My old violin was a cheap student model, its sound as thin as my wallet. I found the fiddle at an old, forgotten estate sale, tucked away in the back of a room that smelled of mothballs and regret. It was beautiful. The wood was a dark, polished maple, almost black, and it felt cold, unnaturally so, even in the stuffy room. The shop owner, a frail old man, barely looked at it. The hangman's fiddle, he called it, said it belonged to his grandfather who got it from a prison auction a century ago. He sold it to me for $20, an insult to its craftsmanship. He seemed relieved to be rid of it. I thought I'd just found the deal of a lifetime. I had no idea I had just bought my own curse. Back in my apartment, I tuned it. The moment the bow touched the strings, the world fell away. The sound, it was unlike anything I had ever produced. It was a deep, sorrowful, and impossibly rich sound that seemed to pull the sadness right out of the room's shadows and turn it into music. My fingers, which usually fumbled on complex passages, moved with a fluid grace I didn't know they possessed. The melody that poured out of the fiddle wasn't one of my own compositions, but it felt like I'd known it my entire life. It was a song of profound loss, of love betrayed, of a deep and eternal loneliness. I played for what must have been an hour, completely lost in the sound, in the story the fiddle was telling through me. For the first time, I wasn't just a musician, I was a vessel for something truly beautiful, and I was weeping. When the final note faded, the silence it left behind was heavy, absolute. I opened my eyes, my cheeks wet with tears, and that's when I saw him. Standing in the corner of my room, by the bookshelf, was a man. He was faint, like smoke, and dressed in old-fashioned farmer's overalls. I could see the wall right through him. He wasn't looking at me with menace. He just watched. His face was etched with a deep, permanent sadness. I blinked, sure that my tired, emotional mind was playing tricks on me. I rubbed my eyes, and when I looked again, he was gone. I laughed, a shaky, nervous sound. I told myself it was just exhaustion, the emotional toll of the music, a hallucination, a trick of the light, a ghost born of a beautiful song. I convinced myself it was nothing. I was so terribly wrong. The next night, I took the fiddle to my usual gig at the Daily Grind. I didn't play my usual set. I let the fiddle lead, and that same heartbreaking, beautiful music filled the cafe. But this time, the effect was different. The usual chatter of the coffee shop died down. People stopped their conversations. They turned to watch me, their faces rapt, some of them with tears in their eyes. The music was a spell, and it was enchanting them. But as I played, I saw them again, at the back of the room, then by the counter, then standing in the aisle, the farmer from my apartment, a young woman in a faded flapper dress, a man in a leather jacket, who looked like he'd stepped out of an old movie, ghosts, a dozen of them at least, and they were all watching me with those same sad, empty eyes. The living audience was enthralled by the beauty of the music, but the dead looked like prisoners hearing the voice of their jailer. After the gig, I packed up the fiddle, my hands shaking. I needed to get out of there. I practically ran out of the cafe, but the feeling of being watched didn't leave me. I looked over my shoulder, and my heart froze. They were following me. The farmer, the flapper, the greaser, all of them, a silent, spectral entourage, gliding down the empty street behind me. They kept their distance, a perfect 20 feet, their feet making no sound on the pavement. I started to walk faster, and they sped up. I broke into a run, and they kept pace, a silent, sorrowful procession chasing me through the sleeping city. I finally burst into my apartment building, slammed the door, and leaned against it, my heart hammering against my ribs. I thought I was safe, but when I looked at the frosted glass of my apartment door, I could see their faint grayscale silhouettes, standing silently in the hallway, waiting. They didn't knock. They didn't make a sound. They just waited. I spent the entire night, huddled in my living room, the fiddle locked in its case, my back against the far wall. Every time I worked up the courage to look through the peephole, they were still there, a silent, spectral congregation in the dingy hallway of my apartment building. My neighbors' doors would open and close, the living residents walking right through the ghosts, as if they were nothing more than cold spots in the air, never noticing. But I could see them. I could feel their collective sorrow pressing in on the door, a weight of unspoken tragedy that was suffocating. They weren't trying to get in. They didn't have to. They had already trapped me. Sleep was impossible. How can you sleep when you know an audience of the dead is waiting for you just outside your door? The next day, they were gone. The hallway was empty. I felt a surge of relief so powerful it made me dizzy. I decided it was the music. The fiddle was the key. If I didn't play it, they wouldn't come. It was that simple. I had to resist it. I took the fiddle, the cold, dark wood feeling like a block of ice in my hands, and I buried it in its case at the back of my closet. I threw old clothes over it, trying to put as much of my normal, boring life between me and it as possible. I spent the day in determined silence. I didn't touch an instrument. I tried to read, but the words were just black squiggles on a page. The silence in my apartment, once a comfort, was now a roaring vacuum, a void that I knew that beautiful, terrible music could fill. But I held on. One day of silence, one day of peace. I just had to prove to myself that I was still in control. I lasted until 10 p.m. The craving was an actual physical ache, a thirst. The fiddle wasn't just in the closet. It felt like it was in my head, its dark, sad melody coiling around my thoughts, begging to be released. I couldn't fight it. I was an addict, and it was my drug. I tore the clothes away, my hands shaking as I opened the case. The moment I drew the bow across the strings, the music erupted from it, more beautiful and more heartbreaking than ever before. And they appeared, not just in the hallway, in the room, all of them, and more. The farmer, the flapper, dozens of others I'd never seen before. They filled my small apartment, a dense, silent, spectral crowd. They stood on my couch, they floated by the ceiling, they pressed in on me from all sides, and they watched me play, their collective grief a physical force that stole the air from my lungs. I played until my fingers bled, a prisoner on a stage of my own making. The next morning, they were gone again, but I knew they would be back, as soon as I played. This wasn't a haunting I could run from. It was a curse I carried. I had to know why. The old shopkeeper's words echoed in my head. The hangman's fiddle. I went to the city library, to the archives, the place where they keep the dead stories. I spent hours scrolling through old, digitized newspapers from the county where the estate sale was held. I searched for anything about a hanging, a murder, a musician, and then I found it. An article from 1892, the trial and execution of a traveling musician named Silas Kane. He was a virtuoso violinist, the article said, who traveled from town to town, playing dances and socials. He was also a monster. He had been convicted of murdering over a dozen people across 3 counties. My breath caught in my throat. I kept reading. The article listed his known victims, the people whose lives he had taken on his travels. A farmer named Jedediah, found in his barn. A young woman named Eleanor, who loved to dance. A young man who worked as a mechanic, killed after a card game. It was all there. A list of names, a list of faces, a list of my audience. They weren't just random ghosts drawn to the music. They were the souls of the people Silas Kane had murdered, their spirits somehow tethered to the instrument of their killer. Every time I played that beautiful, sorrowful music, I wasn't just summoning ghosts. I was forcing the victims to appear and listen to the song of the man who had stolen their lives. I was not their entertainer. I was their tormentor. I couldn't be their tormentor. I wouldn't. The next morning, A frantic, desperate energy filled me. There was only one way to end it. I had to destroy the fiddle. I had to break the connection. I picked it up, the cold, dark wood feeling heavier than ever, and I smashed it against the corner of my table. I expected the sound of splintering wood, of snapping strings, but there was nothing. Not a crack, not a scratch. The fiddle was completely unharmed. I struck it again and again, my knuckles scraping against the table, a wild, ragged sob tearing from my throat, and with every failed blow they appeared around me. The silent, spectral crowd, their sorrowful eyes fixed on me. They weren't threatening me. They were watching, their collective grief a silent plea. They knew what I was slowly realizing. The fiddle could not be broken. Their prison was eternal. I collapsed, exhausted and defeated. And as I sat there, surrounded by the silent dead, a new thought came to me, a musician's thought. I couldn't destroy their prison with force, but maybe I could unlock it with a song. Not Silas Cain's song of sorrow and murder. My song, a song of release. I picked up the fiddle one last time. I ignored the cold dread it inspired, and poured every ounce of my own hope, my own desire for peace, into the music. I didn't play a melody of grief. I played a lullaby, a song of forgiveness, a gentle tune about finding your way home. It was the most honest and beautiful thing I had ever composed. The music glowed, not with a dark energy, but with a warm golden light that pushed back the shadows in the room. And then, the miracle happened. As I played, I felt a change. The ghosts, they were fading. Their grayscale forms became brighter, their features softening. The deep, eternal sorrow in their eyes was being replaced by a faint, peaceful acceptance. I could feel them letting go, their century-long torment finally coming to an end. The farmer was the first to dissolve, then the flapper, each one turning into motes of golden light and vanishing. But as they found their peace, I felt a new weight settle upon me, an unimaginable burden. All of their sorrow, their pain, their stolen years, it wasn't disappearing. The music was channeling it. It was pouring all of that concentrated human misery directly out of them and into me. The fiddle needed a jailer to hold its grief, and I had just volunteered for the job. The pain was an ocean of black ice, and it was filling my soul. When the last ghost faded, I was left alone, but the weight, the grief of a dozen stolen lives, was now mine to carry. The fiddle felt fused to my hand, my chin. I could no longer control it. My own fingers began to move, my bow began to dance, playing that same terrible, sorrowful tune against my will. And as the music filled the room, a new figure appeared in the corner. He wasn't translucent or sad. He was solid, almost real. A man in a dark suit with a cruel smirk on his face. It was him, Silas Cain, the Hangman. He looked at me, and he nodded, as if to a fellow performer. I had freed his victims. I had taken their sorrow upon myself, and in doing so, I had taken his place. He was finally free from his audience, and I was now the fiddle's new hangman, bound to play its sad song for all eternity. Julian Vance's final blog entry was never posted. It ended mid-sentence. When authorities entered his apartment, they found it empty. The only thing left behind was a single, antique violin, sitting in its open case in the center of the room. The instrument was eventually sold at a police auction to another aspiring musician for a paltry sum. Our archives suggest the fiddle was never the prison for Silas Cain's spirit. It was his anchor, and it was powered by the grief of his victims. By freeing them, Julian took on their sorrow, becoming a powerful new anchor himself, and in doing so, he set the hangman free, a chilling reminder that when you deal with cursed things, the price of doing good can sometimes be your own soul. The archives of the Midnight Society are now closed,